Hello, and welcome back to Grave Chroniclers. Get comfortable, sit back, and turn the lights down, because tonight we are taking a deep dive into the frozen final moments of Maurice Wilson, a man who had no business being on the world's highest mountain, and yet climbed it anyway, armed with nothing but faith, a diary, and a certainty that God would see him to the summit. This is his story. In May of 1934, a man's frozen body was found near the base of the world's highest mountain. He had no climbing experience, no technical training, no support team, no permit. He had flown himself, alone, from England to India in a second-hand biplane. He had trekked illegally across Tibet in disguise, and he had walked directly into the most hostile environment on Earth, with absolute, unshakable certainty that God would carry him to the summit. His name was Maurice Wilson. He was 36 years old, and this is one of the strangest, most haunting, most deeply human stories that Everest has ever produced. To understand what Maurice Wilson did, you have to understand what made him believe he could do it. He was born in Bradford, England, in 1898, the son of a textile worker. Unremarkable childhood, unremarkable schooling. When the First World War broke out, he enlisted and was sent to the Western Front. He was shot through the arm and chest at Passchendaele in 1917, wounds severe enough that he was invalided home and nearly died. He recovered, but the war had done something to him that the bullet hadn't quite finished. For the next decade, Wilson drifted. He tried farming in New Zealand, business in New York, a women's dress shop in London that went nowhere. He was restless in the particular way of men who have seen the worst of the world and cannot find their footing in ordinary life afterward. Then, in 1932, something happened that Wilson himself described as a revelation. He was ill, seriously ill, with what he described as a lung condition and a complete physical and mental collapse. By his own account, he had stopped eating for 35 days and prayed, and by his own account, he recovered completely. What he took from that experience was a belief so total, so consuming, that it would reorganize the rest of his life around a single idea, that faith and fasting could conquer any physical obstacle the human body faced. Any obstacle, including, he decided, Mount Everest. Wilson's plan, when he first described it publicly, was received with a mixture of amusement and alarm. He would learn to fly, purchase a small aircraft, fly it from England across Europe, the Middle East, and India to the foothills of the Himalayas, then crash land the plane as high on Everest's slopes as possible, and then, alone and on foot, fast and pray his way to the summit. He had never climbed a mountain in his life. He had never used crampons, an ice axe, or a rope. He had never set foot above roughly sea level in any meaningful sense. When mountaineering experts told him the plan was suicidal, he thanked them for their concern and kept going. He bought a second-hand Gypsy Moth biplane, named her Everest, took flying lessons, and earned his license in a matter of weeks, impressing his instructors with a natural aptitude he had no prior reason to expect. He read every account of prior Everest expeditions he could find. The 1924 expedition on which George Mallory and Andrew Irvine had disappeared near the summit, the early reconnaissance missions, the route descriptions. He packed light, almost absurdly light by any serious mountaineering standard, some food, some warm clothing, a Union Jack flag he intended to plant at the summit, a diary. The British government, made aware of his plans, refused him an overflight permit for India and Tibet, and strongly advised him not to go. The Air Ministry threatened legal action. Wilson filed his flight plan and took off anyway. What followed was, by any measure, extraordinary. Wilson flew Everest solo from Stag Lane Aerodrome in London on May 21, 1933, across France, over the Mediterranean, through Egypt and the Middle East, landing to refuel at small desert airstrips, through Persia and into India, navigating by map and compass over terrain that had swallowed better-equipped aviators whole. He was forced down twice by authorities, once in Egypt, once in India, and on each occasion talked, charmed, or waded his way back into the air. British officials in India eventually impounded the plane and told him in no uncertain terms that he would not be permitted to continue. Wilson abandoned Everest without ceremony and continued on foot. He hired 3 Sherpa guides, Tewang, Rinzing, and Sering, and in March of 1934, the group set out disguised as Buddhist monks through the forbidden territory of Tibet. Wilson wore robes, kept his head down, and marched. His diary from this period is remarkable, not for its descriptions of hardship, but for its almost total absence of doubt. He wrote about the mountains with reverence, about God with certainty, and about himself with the calm matter-of-factness of someone who had already decided how the story ended. They reached the Rongbuk Monastery at the base of Everest in mid-April 1934. The head lama of the monastery, reportedly, tried to talk Wilson out of continuing. Wilson thanked him and continued. What Wilson encountered on Everest was not what he had read about in expedition accounts. The descriptions of the route, written by experienced, well-equipped teams of professional climbers supported by dozens of porters and weeks of acclimatization, did not translate to what a lone, untrained man in insufficient gear experienced when he actually stepped onto the ice. The East Rongbuk Glacier alone nearly stopped him. It is a tortured, broken landscape of ice towers and crevasses that even experienced climbers describe as one of the more technically demanding approaches on the mountain. Wilson had no crampons initially. He had to acquire them, and no idea how to use them properly. He fell repeatedly. He got lost on the glacier and had to backtrack. He was moving at altitude that reduced his lung capacity to a fraction of what it was at sea level, and his body had not been given time to adjust. He retreated. He came back. He retreated again. His diary entries from this period begin to shift in tone, not in faith, never in faith, but in the raw, unvarnished accounting of physical suffering, frostbitten fingers, exhaustion so total he describes lying in his tent, unable to move for entire days. Altitude headaches that felt, he wrote, like something driving a spike slowly through the center of his skull. And yet, he got up. He went back out. He pushed higher each time. He reached Camp 3 at approximately 21,000 feet on May 21st, 1934, exactly 1 year after he had taken off from London. He wrote in his diary that night, "Off again tomorrow, feeling fine." The entries that follow are the ones that have haunted every person who has ever read them. May 22nd, he set out for the North Col, the steep glaciated shoulder at around 23,000 feet that forms the gateway to the upper mountain. The route to it involves a near-vertical ice face that requires fixed ropes, ice axes, and technical climbing ability that Wilson simply did not possess. He attempted it anyway. He made it partway. He fell. He was not seriously hurt. He rested. He tried again the next day, and the next. His diary entries become shorter. The handwriting, previously neat and deliberate, begins to loosen. Both feet frostbitten, can barely hold the pencil, still determined. The last entry in Maurice Wilson's diary is dated May 31st, 1934. It reads, "Off again, gorgeous day. He was never seen alive again." The following year, in 1935, a British reconnaissance expedition arrived at the base of Everest. Near Camp 3, at approximately 21,000 feet, they found Maurice Wilson's body. He was lying on his side in the snow, partially buried, arms folded against his chest as though he had simply lain down to rest. His tent was a short distance away, collapsed. Inside it, they found his diary, his Union Jack flag, never planted, and the remains of his supplies. His body was buried on the mountain. In 1960, a Chinese expedition found what appeared to be his remains again, disturbed by the movement of ice over the preceding decades. His diary was recovered a second time and eventually made its way to researchers who published portions of it. In subsequent decades, climbers ascending the northeast ridge have occasionally reported catching glimpses of fabric or equipment in the ice far above the established camps, objects that may or may not be remnants of Wilson's final push. The mountain moves slowly. It gives things back on its own schedule. There are two ways to read the story of Maurice Wilson. The first is as a cautionary tale, a man with no experience, no training, and no realistic understanding of what he was attempting, walked into one of the world's most lethal environments on the strength of pure belief and died alone on a glacier at 21,000 feet. a preventable death, a product of delusion dressed as faith. The second way is harder to articulate, but impossible to dismiss entirely. Maurice Wilson crossed Europe, the Middle East, and India alone in a biplane he taught himself to fly. He trekked illegally across Tibet in disguise. He reached the flanks of the highest mountain on Earth without a support team, without technical training, without permission from anyone. He made 3 separate attempts on Everest's upper slopes, on frostbitten feet, with a failing body, and never, in any diary entry, expressed a single word of regret. He did not summit Everest, he never came close, but he also never stopped. His body is still up there, somewhere in the ice of the East Rongbuk Glacier, slowly moving downward the way everything on Everest eventually does, inch by inch, year by year, toward the valley floor far below. A man who believed completely, in a place that believes in nothing. If you made it this far, thank you for watching. Maurice Wilson's diary is one of the most remarkable documents in mountaineering history. Subscribe to Grave Chroniclers for more stories like this one. Some of them end in triumph, most of them don't, but every single one of them is real.